It's a great delight to be here. I would like to introduce myself. I'm a psychiatrist by trade. Before that, an experimental neuropathologist, wet laboratory at the bench. And it has been my great privilege to be kidnapped by American combat veterans. I went to work at the VA expecting to reopen my laboratory, and they saw something in me that I didn't see in myself, and they utterly, like that, redirected my career. It's been quite an extraordinary trip for me. I also have learned that I have some unexpected capacities as an unlicensed philosopher. In doing my work with the veterans, I discovered that I was very much working in the area of ethics, of all things, and that much of what I have done subsequently as their missionary to military forces on prevention of psychological and moral injury is in the realm of ethics. That ethics is preventive psychiatry in military organizations. What a concept. So I'm going to also dig deeper into my intellectual past for another dimension as an unlicensed philosopher, someone who's never been ambitious to be a professor, never been ambitious to be a chief of a clinical service, but continues to have some insanely large ambitions to understand the whole human critter. And before turning to what is more likely to be a takeaway for you, I'm going to give you a thumbnail of the wide-ranging, high-level abstraction of the whole human critter. And I have to footnote this with proper credit. This is vintage Talcott Parsons. I know that there are some relatively few of you in this room who know this name, Sic transit gloria mundi. He was regarded as the greatest sociologist in the middle third of the 20th century. But today, many people have never even heard the name. But it is directly to his credit. The ICBM trajectory of this broad abstraction is the following: that the whole human critter is encompassed by four embodiments, four avatars, or in his terminology, four subsystems, which are the brain, the mind, the social system, and the culture. And what I believe he would have subscribed to, although he never used these terms, is that none of these is at a higher level of reality than the others. That none of these is the really, 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 really real, and the others mere platonic shadows on the wall or shining bubbles on the stream. And the reason for this is not a kind of mushy syncretism. Whatever floats your boat, you're interested in that? Fine. No. It's that these are each other's environments, that they each have obligatory, seen from the context of a whole life cycle. Seen from that perspective, they have obligatory exchanges with each other. And so, in a certain sense, they cannot be derivative from each other. And that furthermore, what governs the development, the response, if you wish, to major perturbation, it lies in the realm of epigenetics, not mechanical reductionism. It is a utterly hopeless reductionist task to have a fully, in terms of rigorous chemistry and physics, a fully reductionist account any time in the next 5 centuries of Moore law's doubling, for a fully reductionist account of this simple thing. On the count of 3, I'm going to drop my pen, 1, 2, 3. This is way beyond any potential science that our species is likely to enjoy even in a very long time. Now, then there's the semi-reductionist account that would encompass neurology, such entities as Pacinian corpuscles, spinal afferents and efferents, and so on and so forth. And that kind of semi-reductionist account is still way beyond our capacities, probably for several generations still. But that use of this philosophic stage prop, that little pantomime, when I said on the count of 3 I'm going to drop my pen, is a very compact and very accurate account. And your comprehension of it is very compact, efficient, and accurate. And there is no legitimate reason for us to scorn it as an account. It is a highly evolved account that emerges from our physical evolution as the human species. So let's celebrate and enjoy the advances of science that we can bring about, but let's not get too fucking cocky about it. It just makes no sense. It is way beyond what we can accomplish. Now, another of the gifts that the veterans gave to me is that they gave me a mission. And it's been a gratifying mission, interesting. They said to me, "Doc, we don't want no other good young kids wrecked the way we were wrecked. You've learned enough from us. You go tell them guys in the Pentagon what they need to do to protect them." And I have, at this point, for roughly 20 years, been their missionary to the armed forces. And real quick, I'll tell you what my missionary mantra is. I tell my audiences, and I do get a hearing, which is amazing. They're quite hermetic institutions. And I'm a bearded Jewish psychiatrist from Barney Frank's district in Newton, Massachusetts. And it's sort of, man bites dog newsworthiness that this guy, Shay, gets a hearing. So I tell them I'm a missionary from the veterans I serve. They don't want other young kids wrecked, and this is how you can protect these young kids. Keep people together. Create and preserve positive qualities of community in the face-to-face unit. The jargon for this is cohesion. That's one. Second is expert, ethical, and properly supported leadership. That's two. And the third is prolonged, cumulative, and highly realistic training for what they actually have to do and face, and that's three. So my mantra over and over and over again, if you're going to be a missionary, you have to love repetition. Cohesion, leadership, training. Cohesion, leadership, training. Well, this is an interesting experience saying this to military audiences. I can recall the Secretary of the Navy's guest lecture in the Naval Command Center in the Pentagon. It was a small, secure auditorium about the size of half of this central section behind thick walls to permit classified briefings. And it was entirely filled with Marine general officers and Navy flag officers and some people from the secretariats. And there comes a moment with every such audience that somebody in the audience says, well, we want those things too. These are combat strength multipliers. These are combat strength multipliers. And that gives me the great moment. Some of you are familiar with our local celebrities, Click and Clack, the Tappet brothers on NPR, to give them my best auto mechanic shrug. So, why are we doing such a lousy job of it? And that's an interesting moment because it leads to some shifting from buttock to buttock and looking at shoes. And then a voice, usually from the back somewhere, comes. It's the personnel system. And that may seem to you like the person in the back is voicing the collective cop-out of pointing to somebody else and saying it's their fault. But there is a great deal of truth in it. And if I can reframe it slightly, it is a model of bureaucratic rationality that most visibly embodies itself in the military personnel system, that says that we shuffle soldiers like a deck of cards. In the late 1990s, a first-term soldier in the Army would be in 7 different small units in the course of his first term of enlistment, which meant that he was constantly learning to get to know direct leaders, get to know peers, and so forth. So my mission did morph into a mission to thoroughly renovate various aspects of military policy, practice, and culture. Now, I want to just circle back to that large-scale brain, mind, society, and culture for a moment, and to push you as an audience a little bit further on it. That when who we are biologically, Homo sapiens sapiens, when we first appeared in the Upper Paleolithic, I submit that all of those were completely present, that there has never been a modern and anatomically, physiologically modern human who had half of a mind or a third of a social system or a fifth of a culture. That, in fact, these four subsystems, if you wish, had co-evolved during the period of time that our brain underwent this blam, explosive growth in such a short time, extraordinarily fast growth, that during that period, brain, mind, society, and culture had co-evolved. Now, I will spare you my evolutionary speculations, which I share with Darwin and a number of other people like Jane Goodall, to the effect that the forcing function, because it suggests a real forcing function, was war. And those of you who know my books know that I am no lover of war, and that there is nothing that I more fervently pray for than the end of this hideous human practice, and believe it's possible. But that the ugly truth that it was war that was the forcing function in the Upper Paleolithic, these little societies of perhaps 125, 150 souls moving around and bumping into each other and carrying on genocidal wars with each other. And so you had a population selection condition, not so much an individual selection condition. And that two factors drove this. One was the genes that could support language, and the second was the genes that could support altruistic military self-sacrifice. There is a well-known utterance, I believe first voiced by the great Ronald Fisher, a man for whom I do not take second place in admiration, one of the towering figures in the development of mathematical statistics. But he was totally wrong in his assertion that he was puzzled by how was it possible for people to sacrifice their lives for others who were not related to them. He was the first, I believe, to promulgate the model of so-called inclusive fitness, where if you appeared to be doing something altruistic, it was because you were improving the reproductive success of other people who carried the same set of genes that you did, or at least a large chunk of them. And he said that the reproductive advantage comes from being the kin of a dead hero. The luster, the honor, the social appreciation is so great that the kin of the dead hero are more successful in having living offspring. Well, I thoroughly mocked that at the Society for Human Evolution, pointing to the heartbreaking story in the Iliad of Andromache and Astyanax, and then the equally telling example in the Odyssey of the suitors planning to cut Telemachus's throat because they thought that Odysseus was dead. That's exactly how much those two anecdotes, which many of you will be able to call to mind, illustrate that the benefit of being the child of a dead hero was exactly zip. And so I want to emphasize that the relationships among these four embodiments or subsystems in Parsons' terms is one of mutual exchange, obligatory exchange, and that the way things evolve is epigenetic. And those of you who are conscious of it are aware that the Evo-Devo tradition in embryology has been doing an amazing job of demonstrating that you can do extremely rigorous science. This isn't any mushy, whatever you say, really rigorous science that is not reductionistic. And that similarly, Parsons said that the evolution of action systems, his word for such systems, followed epigenetic principles. And he was well aware of the work of Waddington in the 20s. So what we're finding is that there is a resurgence now of the capacity to do rigorous science in a non-reductionist way. And I hope that I'm of an age that I can remember the Jacques and Monod dogmas of one gene, one protein, and that's everything you need to know. And that I hope all of you are aware of the wonderful work of the historian of science, Fox Keller at Harvard, called The Century of the Gene, a wonderful little summary of the trajectory of the concept of the gene in the 20th century. Small little book, beautifully written and quite trustworthy, I believe. Okay, so I want to give you a flyover of my model of psychological and moral injury, which is the one that I tell to military audiences and explain to them how they can prevent these. I'm going to move fairly quickly, and I'm going to ask you to think like an orthopedic surgeon, like a military surgeon. A soldier or Marine has his arm taken off at the elbow by a mortar fragment. Everyone in this room knows that, and I'm going to call that the primary injury, is not going to kill that soldier or Marine. But the two most dreaded complications, again, this is surgeon talk, the complications of hemorrhage and later infection certainly can and even today still do kill that service member. So what is the primary injury, psychologically speaking, in war? It is the Is it something I said? I don't know why I'm getting that feedback. Anyway, the primary injury is the persistence into life after mortal danger of the absolutely valid adaptations and skills that kept you alive when other people were trying to kill you and doing a damn good job of it. And the three clusters found in the diagnostic manual in PTSD, the three clusters of phenomenology, are not a bad summary of that persistence. And I leave it to you to see how that is the case. It's not hard, and I will cut corners in time by asking you to do that. Now, the complications, just like that traumatic amputation, the complications of the primary psychological injury are truly ruinous. Truly ruinous. Drug and alcohol abuse, danger seeking. After all, the most famous British combat veteran of World War I, Lawrence of Arabia, how did he die? Fast motorcycle riding. And this is not part of the Vietnam stereotype. This is in the nature of that injury. So, and there are other complications that wreck veterans' lives, but the basic point I want to make is that the primary injury does not have to be ruinous and often just leads to focal disabilities in much the same way that somebody who has a traumatic amputation, often with the use of a prosthesis, simply has some focal disabilities and has the capacity to adapt and work around, may require some workplace accommodations, but it doesn't have to be ruinous. But when alcoholism, for instance, sets in, boy, it gets so much more murderously difficult. So it's very similar that way. Now, I have introduced, and apparently I'm the first person to use this coinage. I've introduced the concept of moral injury. Now, this is a resonant phrase, and it is sort of astonishes me to be the first person to use it as a concept instead of just an accidental collision of the two words. And my meaning is very narrow and specific. And it has three components. Number one, when there is a betrayal of what's right. I intentionally state that in common language terms, and that is squarely in the culture as locally construed. Shay here doesn't pretend to see with Einstein and Newton among the stars eternal verities of what's right. I don't know a universal for all people in all places and times. But it is a defendable statement that every human social group has such a code of what is praiseworthy and blameworthy, a code of what's right. So there's the culture. So, number one, a betrayal of what's right by someone who holds legitimate authority. That's squarely in the social system. Authority and legitimacy, locus classicus for sociology, political science, so on. Again, every society has some sort of embodiment of legitimacy and authority. Number three, in a high-stakes situation. And inevitably, that is in the mind of the person who is injured. It is, I was almost fucking killed being ordered to go across that minefield by that schmuck who wasn't willing to listen to the sergeants who've been in this AO much longer than he has and know that it's mine. Or even more telling, my beloved comrade Joe just got his shit scattered by being blown up as a result of following the order to go across that rice paddy. So, 1, 2, 3. Betrayal of what's right by someone with legitimate authority in a high-stakes situation. Now, I want to recommend to you one of the ugliest, nastiest, most unpleasant thought experiments you will ever do, if you choose to do it. And that is to vividly imagine for yourself a situation that fits those 1, 2, 3 criteria for your life situation, not for somebody else, but for you. And if you do that, I promise you that your body will respond. You'll feel sick to your stomach, your guts will churn, your heart will race, and I believe that the brain codes moral injury as physical attack. And so moral injury, as I lay it out there, you see the whole human critter, again, brain, mind, society, and culture. And that was one of the amazing things about doing this work with combat veterans. It was a crossroads for everything that was human. It was astounding. It was fascinating. It was satisfying. Now, I want to quickly tell you some of the simple take-home lessons that I had clinically from 20 years in the VA clinic, working with these very severely wrecked combat veterans. And part of the jollies I get from telling them to you is that they are both painfully simple, and neither of them place overeducated, credentialed professionals like me in center stage. There are two critical jobs that anyone offering to help psychologically and morally injured combat veterans should have on their to-do list as the first and second thing. Number one, sleep. It's so humiliatingly simple. People want it to be fancy, especially credentialed professionals want it to be fancy. The physiology here is vividly clear that sleep is fuel for the frontal lobes of the brain, that every hour of lost sleep drains the tank a bit, and when you're really out of gas in your frontal lobes because of sleep loss, You lose your ethical self-restraint. You lose your emotional self-restraint. You lose the capacity for that kind of cognitive reframing that says, this is here, this is now, and that was there and then. That's cognitive reframing. And it is a catastrophe not to have the reliable use of your frontal lobes. I believe that anything we can do that will reliably and consistently improve the quality and quantity of sleep that anyone coming back from combat can achieve will make everything in their lives better. Now, unless to make sure you don't think this is special pleading for somebody who has the legal authority to write a prescription, I want to point out that practically every single one of the helping professions has a really good bag of tools for helping people with sleep. There is important and safe, not perfect, but important and safe pharmacological agents. Yes. But the psychologists have a terrific bag of tools to help people with sleep. Acupuncture, people do really well in improving people's sleep. A multitude of practices and disciplines have something to bring here. This is not special pleading for MDs, but it is special pleading for sleep. Now, since this is in this segment on aging, I don't have a good memory for citations of papers, but I do recall an old paper that indicated that if you have any sleep disruption at all on a consistent basis, this shortens your life. This was gross mortality, that your gross mortality is higher in every age slice if you have something disordered, and it apparently didn't much matter what. And it's probably not just contaminated by obstructive sleep apnea. I mean, obviously, that's a catastrophe. Okay, so number one in the rather undignified, simple objectives. Number two, peers, 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 peers. The royal road to recovery for a psychologically and morally injured veteran leads through peers, people to whom he can entrust his experience and expect that they will understand it and understand its heft. And at every step in it, peers are incredibly valuable. There's a little pantomime that usually people appreciate. A young Marine comes back from one of the current theaters, and Shay, the overeducated professional, says, "So, how you doing? Any kickback from what you saw there, what you did there?" "I'm fine, and what the fuck's your problem?" That's the typical response that I would get. And if I pressed him in the absence of having really put in the time on station to create a relationship with him, I might end up getting my nose broken, or if I was lucky, he'd just turn his back and walk away. But okay, now in the pantomime, I'm no longer Shay. I'm a 1st Marine Division veteran from, say, the Gulf War or the Vietnam War. And I say exactly the same words and get exactly the same response. But I can both safely and effectively respond. Hey, you're a lying sack of shit. I can see by your eyes you ain't sleeping. Talk to me. I've been there. I know what it's like. Talk to me. And that has a very good chance. And if the professionals create a safe and stable environment for veterans to do this work with each other, the chance is even greater. And you see I'm bald. I tear my hair. I try to get across both to the professions and to the institutions. Get yourself out of center stage. Get out of the way of the veterans doing this work with each other. And it's a hard sell, and I'll spare you the various war stories in that regard. Okay, I think at this point I would like to hear ideas, comments, arguments, questions. Mike.